All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Happy to welcome Angie Speaks today. She's the co-host of the Low City Pod, an opinion columnist at Newsweek, and a YouTuber at youtube.com/Angie Speaks. Angie Speaks, welcome to the news.
Thank you. It's Low Society Pod, but easy mistake to make.
What did I say?
You said Low City.
Low
That
Society
sounds like a rap
Pod.
album. It sounds more like a rap album than a podcast.
Well, thank you for, please, and I welcome the corrections in real time. If I make a mistake, call me out in real time. I don't have to edit
I'm holding
that way.
you accountable. That's what I'm doing.
I need that. I need that, especially as a cisgendered male. I need that. You know who needs to be held accountable, Angie? Dave Weigel. Have you followed this story?
Oh yeah. I've been following that story since it's been unfolding, and I'm not surprised, but it's also demoralizing at the same time.
So people, I'll set it up for people. Wow, it's my son. Never give your children electronics. My son. I apologize. It's me.
It's all good.
I made this. I made this faux pas. My kids now have these watches. They don't have iPhones or anything like that. They have these watches where they can there's 3 people in the world that they're allowed to call, and me while I'm taping a podcast is one of them. Dave Weigel made a mistake of liking a tweet, and it was like a YouTuber who tweeted something like, there's 2 types of all women are bi. They're either bisexual or what was the other one?
Bipolar.
Bipolar.
Yeah. Which is pretty funny.
I mean, it is what it is. I'm not saying it's, the greatest joke in the world, but people were saying he retweeted it. I'm not even sure he did that, but he liked it. And now he has been suspended for a month without pay by the Washington Post. And his colleague, Felicia Sonmez, who I actually follow her on Twitter. She follows me on Twitter. I don't really know her, but she's been on a jihad against him for a week now, trying to take him down. What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, I think it just sort of exposes the careerism that's often behind these attempts to cancel or admonish people for very innocuous things. It sort of has the moral cover of social justice and sort of pretends as if it's for progressive reasons, but 9 out of 10 times it's usually because it's a career rival and it's an easy way of taking them down. And I feel like there isn't enough emphasis on the incentive structure behind a lot of these attempts at cancellation, and the fact that it's attached to the incentive structure of the media, the incentive structures of social media, all of which are kind of centered around these incredibly hyper competitive attention economies. So it doesn't surprise me when I see cynical attempts to damage other people's careers using this sort of new avenue of social justice and grievance, especially because a lot of the things that are weaponized are often innocuous. It's a silly joke. I thought it was funny when I saw, because I saw the tweet, the joke tweet floating around.
So you saw it before. You saw it before the Weigel controversy.
Yeah, I saw it beforehand. Someone had retweeted it or something. And it's a silly joke. It's literal, the sort of thing I would hear my brothers say. I'm not losing sleep over it. And I think that the people who are being purposefully hyperbolic. And I can't believe I even have to explain that.
I can't imagine, Angie, I can't imagine a scenario. Now, I worked for 6 years at the Daily Caller, which is a conservative outlet that was controversial. And some people would say maybe I should have policed it more. And now I work at the Daily Beast, where I'm the most conservative person there. Mm. And in either scenario, it was 12 or 13 years of working at places where there were plenty of people on both sides of the aisle that I disagreed with. I can't imagine caring about anybody's tweets, caring about what they liked, or calling them out publicly. A colleague of mine, someone I work with, publicly calling them out. You could argue maybe I should, but I just wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, but it's this new avenue of grievance, sort of grievance that's like linked to social justice, has like provided an outlet for these sort of careerist impulses, I guess, which is why people who have capital in that sense, like, so as a white man or whatever, you would have less
I've got
capital.
no capital.
Yeah, to weaponize. And that's not to say that there aren't legitimate grievances, but it's pretty obvious when something is a legitimate grievance, and someone liking a tweet that you find off color isn't enough to attack their livelihood and their career. That's something that you find off color. That's like a you issue.
Why doesn't
And like,
Dave Weigel, I'm not a lawyer, like,
yeah,
why doesn't Dave Weigel do what Johnny Depp did, which is like go on offense? Why doesn't he demand that his union support him? I assume he has one. I've got one. Why doesn't he sue the Washington Post? Or why doesn't he? Why doesn't the Washington Post stand up to Felicia?
yeah,
Where are the adults? Why do,
yeah.
is the empire going to ever strike back here?
I don't think so, because I think it depends on the resources that you have access to. Like, Johnny Depp has access to a tremendous amount of resources, so he can spend money on lawyers, spend money on litigation. Whereas if you're just like a normal person or a journalist or somebody who doesn't make millions of dollars, it's incredibly difficult to get tied up in that like Charlotte's Web. And secondly, like, it's within the interests of these publications, well, this is how they view it, to avoid controversy at all levels. And this sort of social justice constituency often escalates its claims, even if something starts innocuous. If the response that they want to that thing, whether it be someone getting suspended or fired, isn't done immediately, they often escalate their claims, dig up other things from the past to pile on, and it becomes this like huge thing. But also, I think it has to do as well with like the political leanings of a specific publication, who they're funded by, what their media agenda is, if they're sort of in line with the DNC kind of pipeline in that sense,
Yeah.
they're more likely to not rock the boat. It would be nice to see people being able to stand up for themselves, but because of the institutional stranglehold that this kind of mentality has, if you do, you're kind of a babe in the woods. You're on your own. You're out in the cold.
Yeah. That's a good point, right? I mean, journalistic outlets used to pride themselves on a certain ethics and independence, but more and more, both media outlets on both sides are picking a tribe. And once you pick a tribe, you've got donors or owners who are on that side, and
Yeah.
not to mention readers and audience on that side. And so, the Washington Post, I guess we should just admit, is a progressive outlet, and so they have to cater to that audience. And if they angered that audience, they would be in trouble at some point, even if it's not with their management, with their readership.
Yeah, because of the incentive structure, they're intellectually constrained. And you see a lot of this on the liberal left, not just in journalism, but in academia, among public intellectuals even, who are sort of part of that constituency. Because of the incentive structure behind their institutions, they're unable to explore or even espouse intellectual areas that are outside of like the prescribed like areas. And yeah, it's shocking to see people be so intellectually constrained, like journalists that I admire, or sorry, intellectuals that I admired at one time, seeing them
Yeah.
so
So
intellectually
do you think,
constrained
though,
now.
how much of this is just a Twitter phenomenon, right? Like, I feel like it is very unlikely, it's possible, but unlikely anything I say on this podcast will get me fired. I think it's possible, but unlikely anything I actually write in a column or an email, like an email newsletter, will get me fired. But Twitter, for some reason, seems to be more dangerous. Do you agree with that? And if so, why?
I don't know. I think it's an institutional thing. I think it's bad on Twitter because of the incentive structure around Twitter and how it's sort of a hub for all discourse. But at the same time, I get similar stories from friends in academia that very similar things happen in academia. I think it's like an institutional mindset. and I think it gets like enforced within institutions. So I don't think it's solely a Twitter problem, but there is something particularly pernicious about Twitter because people see what's said on there as like indicative of one's entire morality or entire worldview. And as somebody who likes to cover serious topics once in a while and then shit post once in a while as well, I've experienced how people will take it so seriously. Like when you make a joke, people take it so literally and see it as this like reflection of your character as a whole.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's something particularly pernicious about how Twitter operates in that way. But I think it's like a general problem in a lot of institutions that are like linked to or like weaponized by this sort of liberal left constituency.
So while this Weigel gate is going on, Dave Weigel being suspended, there's another Washington Post reporter, Taylor Lorenz, who for some reason is a face. You know, like Weigel is now a heel, to use the professional wrestling parlance. But Taylor Lorenz, I guess, is a good person, and she keeps doing things that are controversial, but she's okay. She's not suspended, right? What's up
Yeah.
there?
I mean, again, because of who she serves, like she's sort of a foot soldier for the liberal media in that sense and the agenda of the liberal media. So whatever she does is like excusable, but whatever everyone else does is either spreading misinformation or inciting violence. Like I remember a few weeks ago, even though I don't always agree with Candace Owens, I thought it was really funny that she went and showed up at the head of Black Lives Matter's house, Patrisse Cullors. And Patrisse Cullors was then screaming about how she was unleashing white supremacist violence on her by coming to her house and all of this crazy stuff. But then when Taylor Lorenz literally harasses the family members of the Libs of TikTok account owner, it's seen as journalism and this like heroic feat to stop fascism. So it's like rules for thee, but not for me. And that's how
Yeah.
it usually works. Even just being a public figure in the media, as a Black woman who like disagrees with a lot of liberal left orthodoxy, I get a lot of like the majority of the racism I've experienced online has been from liberals who feel like it's fine to say the worst things because I'm a bad guy. Like I'm in the basket of deplorables. So like whatever they do is like fair game. And I think that that's the
Yeah.
mentality, is that they feel so morally justified in their cause and in their sort of cultural vanguard mentality that any rules that are broken are justified. And yeah, it's why someone like Taylor Lorenz can get away with all the crap that she does. um, and also because of her background as well, her relative privilege, the way she weaponizes trauma and vulnerability as well. It's sort of this
Yeah.
strength of weakness.
And here's the thing. I mean, I've gotten death threats and mean things said about me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
haven't like put it on Twitter and advertised it, but like I
Yeah.
think, you know, she did this whole MSNBC hit about like, oh, you don't know. And the same thing with Felicia Sunmez, who anytime someone says to her like, hey, it's time to back down, she's like, you don't know that people are coming after me. And she'll like put up bad, horrible things that should not be said about her on Twitter. But like that happens to everybody, including me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I'm sure you
it's
too.
part and parcel of the territory if you're any kind of public figure. Um, but they have the people like that usually weaponize vulnerability. It's like a strength of weakness tactic, or topping from the bottom, if to use more vulgar analogies. It's basically pretending to be weak and vulnerable while being incredibly institutionally connected and privileged and protected. And it's so obvious to anyone with half a brain, but it sort of works because there is
Yeah.
so much institutional power behind these kinds of people, so they're protected. Whereas people who are dissidents or independent in any sort of way, or even if you're traditionally aligned with like the sort of liberal left orthodoxy, but you have issues with their cultural agenda, you're automatically flung into the basket of deplorables. So anything you do is by default bad. Anything they do is by default good. And that's kind of where we are at the moment, culturally.
So tell us about a little bit about you. I mean, you mentioned your political views that are sometimes unorthodox. Tell us about your background and how you ended up where you are.
Sure. So I actually started on YouTube, and it was during the time when like the YouTube left was coming up. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I was like a huge part of that specific movement, but because my videos and analysis sort of focused a lot on like late stage capitalism and the sort of deleterious effect of neoliberalism on like culture and psychology and all of those different things, I kind of was adjacent to that scene. But then my critiques became a lot more pointed, and a lot more like obviously critical of the left, because I saw a lot of the trends and incentives that I was criticizing celebrated on the very left that I was supposedly adjacent to. So when I was sort of criticizing those things, I found myself getting a lot of pushback, and a lot of vitriol. So I was kind of ostracized from that whole like milieu. And then I started a podcast, and I also met Batya, got the column at Newsweek, which has been really great as well. And I've just sort of been looking for different places where my critique is welcome, away
That
from
is
the
awesome.
insanity of the political spectrum, I guess. So I guess I'm just like a nomadic wanderer of
Hmm.
the political wasteland.
I mean, do you think that like 20 years ago, you would have more been like a liberal Democrat
I
compared to
mean,
today?
I don't feel like my positions have changed very much. I think everything else has. I think a lot of the people who were like normie libs like 5 years ago, according to the left, are now considered like fascists. Like
Yeah.
I don't think that many of us have changed that much. I think that like the goalposts have just shifted in such an absurd direction, and like I think it didn't Trump wasn't the thing that did it like fully, but I think it was the catalyst for this weird coalition
Yeah.
between what was once the left and like the neoliberal consensus, because they were so afraid of Trump, they kind of coalesced into this giant ugly thing. um and I was more interested in like the materialist side of the left, the side of the left that is about workers empowerment and unions and the working class and material benefits for everyday people. Like that's what I'm interested in. But the identity politics and the cynical weaponization of grievance and victimhood sort of took over and pushed every single faction of um, material or working class fealty or allegiance out of the left. And I sort of watched the tail end of that happen, because I'm quite young, so I've not been around for a long time. But I sort of watched the tail end of that happen over the last couple of years. So yeah, that's kind of what pushed me into being a wanderer. But yeah, maybe 10 years ago I would have just been a normie lib. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I guess I don't really. I kind of consider myself like a political schizophrenic, just like everyone else, because the terrain is like so schizophrenic now that it's hard to say. But I have principles, I guess, and things that I would like to see put forward. And I'm sort of just observing how now feels like everyone else.
Are you, am I right? You're in London. Are you from England?
Yes. Yeah, I'm
Very
from
cool.
England, but also grew up in America as well. So I'm transatlantic.
Oh, cool. Love the
Yeah.
accent. Everyone, I'm sure everyone loves the accent. I mean,
Thank
it's,
you. Thank you very much. So I have a bit of a cold right now as well. So
we all have a soft spot for the British accent. If I had a British accent, I feel like I would be farther ahead. I mean, I would,
oh dear, I
it's,
don't know. I feel like like I feel like it sounds a bit formal and like cold and like distant at times. I like the warmth of the American accent.
it's good too, but we can't call people the C word. And
That's true.
I'm given to understand it's like an everyday occurrence over there.
Yeah, it's like a second nature at this point. I remember because I went to high school in America, and I like casually dropped the C bomb, and everyone looked at me like I was like I had like committed some giant infraction, but it was like normal for me.
Imagine if you were me. Um, let's talk about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. That was super
Yes.
interesting.
Mhm.
I've been watching Johnny Depp since 21 Jump Street before you were born.
Yeah.
And he's become weird. He was a super good looking guy back when he owned like the Viper Room. You know what I mean? Like Johnny Depp was this really cool guy who's become a weird dude, but it doesn't mean that he's like a predator or anything like that. And I was surprised, right? Because it's really hard to win a defamation suit in America, and
Mm.
he did it. Um, what do you think? And does that set like a precedent now for men?
Well, I don't want to use this incredibly like dysfunctional toxic relationship as like a universal theorem for anything really, but at the same time you can't ignore the political implications of this, specifically because the ACLU was involved. So this goes way
Right.
beyond just Johnny Depp and Amber
They
Heard and
wrote
their
Amber Heard's the
yeah,
op-ed that
yeah,
she
yeah,
published. So this is sort of messed up anyway, right? I mean, like
yeah.
it's
And it
one thing
shows
to
again.
help. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're making a great point.
I was just going to say it also goes to show the fact that this is linked to a bigger agenda.
Yep.
The Me Too machine, the spectacle of grievance, all of these different things, the fact that you have like political institutions that are involved, like this is a larger kind of agenda, and within like the sort of for-profit grievance
And
milieu that's like
the media's complicity in this. I mean, like
yeah,
they're like I'm not an expert on media ethics, and it makes sense to me that someone who's a victim would have other organizations helping them, but for this group to essentially write the op-ed and then use their contacts in the media to place it seems
yeah.
a little bit weird to me.
Yeah, I mean,
I
they
don't know.
wrote an op-ed that was like determined as defamatory by a court of, a jury of peers or whatever. Like that's like a pretty big deal. And like I said, it shows you that this is linked to much more than just like this dysfunctional kind of relationship between these two people. This is about the way people can profit from grievance, people can profit from victimhood, and it's been going on for a very, very long time. Even the controversy with like Black Lives Matter, that's going on at the moment with the tax information that's been coming out, and the fact that people, including the families of victims like Tamir Rice's mother, have been coming out for years talking about their grievances with the organization, the fact that there's been a lack of transparency about funds. It's a norm. The Jesse Smollett case is another example of somebody who fabricated something in order to have proximity to the kind of victimhood that would launch them into like attention. Basically, there's an
Yeah.
attention economy around victimhood, and especially
There's a
around things
race
like
to be the victim now. It used to
yeah,
be that you wanted to be the winner, and now like
yeah,
it's who can be the biggest victim, and then if
yeah.
you have the moral authority and you get publicity and everyone loves you. It's
Yeah, but
amazing.
that's what happens when like the sort of the sort of incentive structure behind like a sort of neoliberal economy affects the way that we relate to each other in the media, psychologically, interpersonally.
All right, well,
We sort of
let me stop you there. You said something interesting. So
yeah,
I'm basically like a free market capitalist conservative.
mm,
You're not, right? I mean, you and
no,
Batya. Okay, can you make a connection between this identity politics,
yeah.
victimhood, and capitalism? I'd
Yeah,
love to hear it.
massively,
Please.
massively. When you're sort of, I do think that there's a sort of psychological through line when you're taught to view everything as a commodity. And victimhood is an incredibly precious commodity right now. It yields a lot. And it's not just victimhood. Our social relations have been colonized by the market through social media. I do feel like the mentality of neoliberalism, the idea that everything is fair game for marketization and commodification, I do think that that has a deleterious effect, which is why I have sort of a more I guess traditionally kind of Marxist critique of this. Like I do think it's intrinsically linked to the incentive structure behind things. I think identity politics is like a mask for it. It's like the polite face of this kind of very dangerous system, that's sort of out of control. How we deal with it, I don't know. Like I'm not gonna say that I'm like some kind of vanguardist or anything. Like I know I just can see the problem. And there are a lot of people on the right as well that make criticisms of neoliberalism and how it's atomized us, how it's like eroding our social relations, how it's making us
Yeah.
more Machiavellian and pernicious. So this is something. This is like a thought form that sort of arches between both the right and the left. Like you see critiques of neoliberalism coming from both. Um, but I definitely think it's intrinsically linked to the profit motive, and also the idea of self commodification, self marketing, and avenues to launch oneself into public consciousness. And there are certain institutions that are gatekeepers in that sense. And one of the easiest ways to pass those gatekeepers is to leverage one's identity or one's struggle or one's standpoint. And this is something that has been going on for a really long time, but people have been afraid to question it because they feel that like they're assailing a victim by exercising due diligence, due process. So in a sense, I do think that this case is a win, not just for men who may be in situations where they haven't been believed either, but also it's a victory for due process, in my opinion, and highlighting the importance of due process beyond adjudicating guilt and innocence based on identity and proximity to victimhood and all of those different things.
So, like, Johnny Depp had recordings of Amber Heard saying things like, go ahead and, I'm paraphrasing, but like, go ahead and tell people that I abused you. Like, no one's going to believe you. Like, you're a man. And do you think he had a chance without those recordings?
Do you think I had a what? Sorry?
Would Johnny Depp have had a case? And absent those recordings, like if Johnny Depp didn't have that evidence, would he have had a chance?
I don't think so.
The lesson is record everything.
Yeah,
if you need to.
I don't think so. I think that because of the cultural edict and the political pressure around these sorts of spectacles and what it means, I think that if he hadn't had done the due diligence of compiling evidence, he may have not stood a chance because of the narrative that reigns supreme currently. And yeah, everybody should in this day and age, unfortunately, do their due diligence. And if you're in a relationship where you feel as if you need to record the person, you probably shouldn't be in that relationship to begin with. Just the idea of like whipping out your phone and having these like weird it was, what was going on with them was clearly very toxic. But again, like I said, it goes beyond the celebrity kind of spectacle of it, which is the part that I wasn't really that interested in. What really pricked my ears up was the fact that like the ACLU was involved. I think that should give everybody pause, and it should also make everyone re-examine the way that Me Too has been cynically used. And I think that people should be asking the question, why? And I've not seen a lot of that going on. I don't see anyone asking why the ACLU was involved in the penning of this defamatory op-ed. What was their agenda? What was their purpose? Why did they decide to put their reputation on the line if they weren't convinced that they could get away with it?
Besides, I mean, the ACLU is ostensibly about civil liberties, right? They're not about defending women who've been abused, or, I mean, that's not their calling. So it was sort of out of their lane to begin with. Let me ask you this. I think I know the answer based on things you've said already, but I want to be sure. What do you think was her motive, Amber Heard? What was her motive for making this, for writing this, or having this written for her and making these allegations?
I think it's a confluence of a lot of different things. I mean, part of the trial I watched that I thought was really revealing was that her psychologist or therapist came to testify and also to divulge her diagnoses, and she's diagnosed as a borderline and as a histrionic. And these fall into the cluster B territory of of personality disorders, and they're sort of adjacent to narcissistic personality disorder as well. So I was like, okay, yes, it makes sense that because people who have these disorders tend to be incredibly attention hungry, and they become emotionally dysregulated when they feel that they're not getting enough attention.
I think that these disorders used to be a problem for people, but in this attention economy, I think that they help people flourish. I think there's a
Yeah, they
ton of
do.
people who are really
Yeah,
famous right
yeah,
now who
yeah.
have these problems.
Yeah, we live in a BPD society. And even then, the incentive structure of social media encourages you to behave in these ways, even though you may not necessarily be diagnosed with
Right,
a
right.
disorder. Like you're incentivized to behave in a
The people who
histrionic
have
way.
it, having it gives you
Thrive. Yeah.
a competitive advantage.
Yeah, they thrive. It's almost like an evolutionary advantage if we're going to say that this was like the great savannah. Like the guys who are the strongest now
Right.
are the ones who are the most histrionic, the most narcissistic, and who also have borderline tendencies in terms of their
Yes.
relational instability. And people with borderline tend to be incredibly relationally unstable. If they feel abandoned, they tend to act out really negatively, as in like violence or some
Yeah.
way of sabotaging or vindictiveness if they feel as if their
So we're
grandiosity.
rewarding as a society, we're rewarding
Yeah,
all
we
sorts
reward
of
this.
really bad.
Yeah, we're rewarding it, and
Uh,
these disorders of personality are becoming so much more common and prevalent, especially among younger people. But that's just one dimension of it. So I think the second dimension as well is, like you said, there's this entire incentive structure that's set up to reward people with these antisocial, relationally unstable characteristics. And of course, they're going to take it, especially because it has a moral cover. You know, back in the day, it was seen as socially unacceptable to be seen as grasping or to be seen as admonishing someone for personal gain. But now you can sort of hide that behind grievance. You can conceal these antisocial impulses behind grievance. And yeah, there's an entire attention economy that's set up to like incentivize these people and to embrace these people and to launch these people to the forefront of our consciousness. And I think that it's tearing the fabric of society apart. We're
yeah.
allowing the most antisocial people to be at the forefront of our culture. Um, and I think this case was like a win in the sense that it's finally brought to the mainstream's attention the fact that this is happening and that there needs to be a change in the mode of operation. But whether or not that's actually going to happen is another thing. I have my doubts because I'm a hardened cynic at this point because of all I've seen and like all I've been through. I don't
Well,
think
I
we've
mean,
seen the last.
The Dave Weigel thing is coming. I mean, I'm not, the two are not
Yeah,
analogous exactly, but I
yeah,
mean, you know,
yeah.
we haven't learned much. And I agree with your cynicism. Let me ask you this. How is it that Amber Heard's therapist testified? I mean, I would assume you could not compel someone to allow their therapist should be
Yeah,
privileged information. How did that happen?
yeah. I thought it was odd too, and I have no idea why it happened. I thought it was very strange that her therapist, because really and truly that undermines her because the
Yeah.
symptoms of
Unless it
things
was
like
her witness.
yeah,
Was it her
the things
witness?
like borderline and histrionic personality disorder, like the symptoms of that and the sort of personality patterns sort of undermines her credibility quite significantly. So I
Yeah.
wondered why we saw that diagnosis, or whether that diagnosis was being used as an excuse to say, oh, this is like a ubiquitous pattern for Amber.
Maybe that was
She
it.
can't help herself. She's compelled to behave in erratic
You know
fashion
what?
because of
One
her
of the cool
personality.
things about this show is there will be someone listening who's a expert who can tell us in the comments or something. So
Yeah,
please do that. I'm curious.
yeah,
And I don't want to Google
yeah.
it. So
It's all good. It's all good. I just have like a bit of a morbid fascination with cluster B, because I think it's so prevalent in society now. But I'm by no means like a clinical expert or anything. I'm just kind of like shooting from the hip in terms of what I know. But yeah, I do think that these traits are becoming more ubiquitous and that they are incentivized by the culture that we live in and rewarded by the culture we live in. And there are now new avenues open to people who have these sort of antisocial characteristics to sort of weaponize victimhood and grievance for their own benefit. And I think she, because of her grandiosity, she bit off a lot more than she could chew and ended up shooting herself in the foot. Um, but only time will tell. I don't think we've seen the last of her. I think that she's going to be around for a while, and I think that this is going to be sort of a thing where she rebrands in some other form of victimhood, or maybe I could be wrong, but I don't know. I just feel like I just feel like the way that the culture is right now and the way that bad, like people with these
Yeah.
traits are rewarded. I don't see her like actually
I
having to
just
deal
wonder
with
how
many
much of this,
consequences.
like, was it Peter Thiel who sued, was it Gawker with the Hulk Hogan video? Do you remember this?
No, I don't
Anyway,
remember that.
um, well, okay, but Johnny Depp obviously sued Amber Heard for defamation. Like examples of that are are gonna, if enough of them happen, then they'll change the incentive structure, right? And so, like, if Dave Weigel were to sue his union or sue the Washington Post or whatever, um, but I feel like we need people to stand up and say no. We're not going
Yeah,
to tolerate this anymore. You know, um, when I worked at the Daily Caller, and there were a lot of, say what you will about the Daily Caller, but if someone criticized us, we didn't do anything about it. And so there was no
yeah,
incentive to attack us. Like, you would attack
yeah,
us. You've got to fire Matt Lewis for that thing he wrote. And Tucker Carlson would be like, go F yourself. We're not going to do
yeah,
it.
yeah,
And they would look impotent, right? And so
yeah,
people quit saying that because they couldn't work the refs. We wouldn't respond. We wouldn't cave to their pressure.
yeah.
And so, I mean, I just feel like we need more courage. Like,
Big
but
time.
yeah,
I think so too, but I also think that part of the reason why people like Johnny Depp, or another example like a J.K. Rowling, can get away with like attacking the beast and poking the bear is because they have the material resources for it not to really impact them. And I think a lot of people who sort of kowtow to this, or are, just suffer in silence, I don't necessarily think it's because they're cowardly. I think it's because they're afraid a lot of the time for their livelihoods and their like jobs. um I know so many people who have been devastated by either false claims or admonishments towards their character based upon very sort of superficial or innocuous acts, who have lost careers, who have lost jobs, who have lost prestige and notoriety. And if you're not someone with a whole lot of material resources at your disposal, you're risking a lot more. And
yes,
it's great that Johnny Depp stood up to it. And I think the people who have the resources to stand up to it without it impacting them as much are the ones who should be more pressured to stand up to it, in my opinion.
absolutely.
And there are only a handful of people who are really like that. And even the people who are the most independent still suffer under, like Joe Rogan, for example, is somebody who's like not necessarily linked to any sort of big media conglomerate. He's like an independent person. But it got to the point where like the White House in its official capacity, like under Jen Psaki during the press conference, was calling for Spotify to censor his
Yeah,
podcast. It got that serious to the point where the White House was attempting to shut him down, or at least inhibit his process if we want to be charitable. Um, and that is how serious it is, that even someone like Joe Rogan, with all the freedom and access and material resources he has, still has this like massive beast on his back, let alone any of us lowies, let alone any of us little ones at the bottom. And I admire people who have the sort of material position where they can face off
yeah,
against this, and they do. Um, but as for everyone else has to choose how they deal with it. So far, I've been able to be uncompromising, but it's come at great cost for me. Great cost for me. Um, and it just depends on what you're willing to lose. But everything I've lost, I'll say I've found again better. So sometimes you do have to be willing to lose shit. And I think a
yeah,
lot of people just are not willing to lose shit. They're not willing to let go. They're not willing to say no. They're not willing to say, I will stick to my principles and wait until something better comes along. And if nothing better comes along, then I'll create the better thing.
yeah.
I think it's
Well,
going to take that kind of tenacious attitude.
let's take Dave Weigel for example.
Mm,
I mean, he's been on the show years ago. I know Dave a little bit. He's good friends with Matt Iglesias, and
mhm.
Matt Iglesias went out on his own and started a Substack, and I think he's making a ton of money doing that. If Dave Weigel had initially said, no, I'm not taking down this tweet, I'm not unliking this tweet, you can go pound sand, I think there's an audience out there. I think he's at the point of enough publicity where he could have crowdsourced a defense fund or something, and that he
Mhm.
could have actually become a major celebrity. And again, I'm not arguing that we should like go looking for go in search of monsters to destroy and like go looking for problems so we can become the great like right
But
wing
again,
revolutionary.
again,
But he
it's
could
this
have done it.
incentive structure. Yeah, he could have.
It came
But
to
again,
him.
it's
I'm saying like he wasn't looking for it. The problem came
yeah,
to him. If he had stood up and said no at that
yeah.
moment, don't you think he could have raised like $1 million right by now? I don't
You
know.
can't. It's possible, but it's difficult because there's a lot of the attention economy is incentivized both ways. So there's a lot of attention that you can get from being at the center of like a victimhood narrative, but you can also get a lot of attention from being cancelled as well and try to reverse engineer it. But
Yeah.
what I've noticed is the people who follow you or attempt to support you off the back of a cancellation tend to only be doing it because of the adrenaline of the spectacle of what you're going through, and then retaining those people attention after the dust has settled is incredibly difficult. And it's
Yeah.
because the attention economy is always grabbing people's attention through spectacle and drama and high stakes and high emotionality, that if you're just trying to, you know, either explore some kind of intellectual territory or enlighten people about something that you've learned or share your insights, that's boring in comparison. Um, it's sort of what people are being trained
Yeah.
mentally to look for and to
I think
respond
he could
to.
have turned heel. You're probably not a big WWE, WWF fan, but in
Yeah,
professional wrestling, it would be like they're playing Hogan's music. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
Weigel could have like turned conservative and been canceled. But I think you make a valid point. He would have had to have done it very quickly
yeah,
because people 2 weeks from now, it's an old story, right? He would have had to have like really quickly turned on a dime and capitalized. But I think flip the script is the way to put it, right? I mean, she's trying to cancel him, flip the script and stand up to the man in this case, or the woman, depending on how you look at it.
mm,
He didn't do it. So I don't know. It's hard to fault him. It's a tough thing to do. I don't know if I would have
yeah.
done it, but it might have worked.
But I guess it's because of also the binary way that people view things. So people assume that anything that doesn't go along with this sort of neoliberal consensus is by default conservative. And there are people who are vehemently against the current order, but who don't consider themselves to be conservatives. And when they kick against it, they automatically get lumped in to a
Yeah.
category that isn't them. And
Yeah.
then they then feel as
Matthew
if they have to play.
Iglesias, Joe
Yeah,
Rogan,
yeah.
they're not really conservatives, but,
No, and then
Adam
they feel like they
Carolla,
have to sort of play that up or whatever. It gets very
Dennis
messy.
Miller. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
And there's this sort of pressure once you sort of garner the support of certain audiences, not always based upon you, what you're saying, the value of your work, but the media spectacle that's like surrounding you because of this cancellation. Like I would hate to get popular off the back of a cancellation because that's like your value then, and that's
Yeah.
the pernicious. That's like the most pernicious aspect of the media, in my opinion, is how it sort of locks people into these like boxes, and it sort of incentivizes people to get attention either through castigating themselves as victims or as like brave warriors against cancel culture, whereas they're
Yeah.
just sort of like capitalizing on the attention that they're getting from cancellations, which if you're somebody who really cares about your work and not just being
Yeah.
a media presence, that sucks. It's
You
fucking
make a
sucks.
valid point, right? If
Yeah,
if if Weigel took my advice, he would be playing the same game
yeah,
that the bad
yeah.
guys are playing.
Yeah. So then that's the reason why if you take it on the chin, you lose out in the short term, but in the long term, it's much, much better, in my opinion. Like you stand up for yourself, but you also keep strong to your principles rather than standing up for yourself while also trying to cater to a new market or demographic.
Yeah.
Because if that's not who you are, that's eventually going to come to a head. And even though it's like
Right.
attractive in the long term, sorry, in the short term, in the long term, it's
Yeah.
not like, healthy.
Well, and I've always thought there's a problem with looking at what you and I do as a business inherently. That's a
Yeah.
problem, right? Because like um we're we're talking about ideas that are super important. I mean, like it's about defending liberal democracy or free markets or big questions that are going to affect how people live and how, if it goes wrong, you've got a society that's really problematic. I don't think we should
Yeah.
be like staking our positions based on like what's going to get me the most followers.
Yeah. Which is why I say like the internet and the sort of social media realm is sort of the neoliberal ethos like made manifest within the social domain. And that
Yeah.
when what how many followers am I getting? What's going to amass the most views? This is that. That's like the logic of like the profit motive outweighing actual like conversation, actual intellectual excavation, actual like dialogue, actual like healthy discourse. That plays such a major role in what's going on now. And I feel like cancel culture and the sort of contentiousness and capriciousness that you see in the media realm is really just like the surface level. It's kind
Do you
of the
think
manifestation that this deeper problem is taking.
do you think that the market, the free market, is like philosophically neutral, and if there's a good culture it rewards good things, if it's a bad culture it rewards bad things? Or do you think it's inevitable that capitalism will turn bad and that bad things will ultimately be rewarded?
Well, like I guess I take a more of a sort of Marxian view on it. I guess because Marx, despite what people say about him, was actually like a admirer of capitalism in the sense that he thought it was very necessary for a specific historical process. So a lot of people think that he was saying that like it was all bad and it was always bad. Like he thought that it was a necessary step in human progress and the sort of the creation of the free market was a necessary kind of leap forward in that sense. That was his mentality on it, but he thought that it inevitably would come to its end and that something else would inevitably need to replace it because it was sort of riddled with contradictions. And that's kind of how I see it. I see it that this new iteration of the ethos of capitalism within the online realm, within the digital realm, is sort of its like final culmination, and it's no longer just affecting how things are produced. It's also affecting how we view each other. It's affecting our interpersonal relationships. It's affecting our psychology. It's affecting our social bonds. It's affecting how we conceptualize community. And I feel like unless something changes and we actually examine the incentive structure behind all of these things, the problems are only going to sort of exacerbate and become more and
Wow.
more like absurd. And that's kind of how I see it. I'm not like saying that we need to have some kind of crazy Soviet style revolution. I'm saying we need to rethink like the structures that are around us and how they're like impacting the way we view each other. And I think that commodity fetishism, uh, the fact that we are being incentivized to commodify our social relations, the fact that our very beings are viewed as commodities, things like identity have now become, pawns on the market. I think that that's something that
Wow.
we should be very concerned about. And that
Maybe it's
everybody.
the British accent, but this is the most compelling case for Marxism I think I've heard.
Oh,
Um,
oh, sorry. I
you
don't
know,
know. Maybe it is.
I just heard Jonah Goldberg was just talking on his podcast about there's a book, Daniel Bell, who was a sort of a neoconservative and intellectual, wrote a book called The Cultural Contradictions of Capitalism, I think.
Hmm.
Basically, it was a conservative critique of capitalism, and the argument
Hmm.
is that capitalism ironically requires like a Protestant work ethic
Hmm.
to work, but then it creates goods that make people consumeristic and liberal in the sense of
Hmm.
being spoiled or decadent. And
Hmm.
so it creates a world that it cannot sustain.
Hmm.
And
It's
I feel like
there's
there
so
is
many.
now this weird thing where
Oh,
like
sorry.
social conservatives social conservatives and Marxists are now,
Yeah.
having a
Yeah, I
moment.
think it's great that there's a coalition of thought across the political spectrum that's like making critiques of neoliberalism. Like one of my favorite conservative thinkers is Christopher Lasch, and he has made some of the most poignant criticisms of the current moment. People sense like the spiritual like malaise that's sort of being cast by the constant incentive to commodify everything at all times, and the sort of
Yeah.
vapid consumer culture that's created, and how our very sense of self, our very sense of being is like being wrapped up into it. Like the people we make fun of, like the blue hairs, the social justice warriors, whatever, they're just like neoliberal subjects. They're like consumers, and their identity is like a consumer category that they've bought into. It's not necessarily as tangible as they believe it is. Um,
Don't
and
you
yeah,
think that's an individual? I agree with you at the macro level. I mean, I think that we have this consumeristic culture that has become divorced from meaning and purpose and spirituality. But I feel like at the micro level, that's an individual responsibility. Like I'm not having that problem as an
mm,
individual. Our culture is, and so I don't know how to square those two things.
I think it's so hard because it's so ubiquitous. And I mean, like kids as young as 8 years old or whatever have iPads in front of them, are on social media. Like it's so hard to stay away from the incentive structures, especially where if you want it, with work as well. If you're a journalist, if you do anything that's kind of if you work in marketing, if you do anything that's sort of related to the digital realm, you're going to encounter this sort of uh, thought process of commodification, and it's going to translate naturally into different areas of your life and your social relations. And from, like I said, from a young age, kids are being exposed to social media. They're being exposed to they're being exposed to things like commodity fetishism. They're creating consumer identities from a young age, more so than I was
Yeah.
able to just with like watching
You are a
TV.
brand, right? We're all
Yeah, you're a
brands.
brand. Make yourself
Yeah.
a brand. Make yourself appeal. Like these are things that are now being drilled into, at least subliminally, on like on an unconscious level, into young people's minds. So yes, to an extent, it comes down to personal responsibility. Try your best to be a good parent to your kid, and as an
Yeah.
adult, take responsibility to avoid these sorts of thought patterns, or to check them in yourself. But I think that it goes beyond personal responsibility because of how ubiquitous it is, and how difficult it is to avoid these mentalities, because we're all reliant on the teat of social media. If you work in any
That's a
industry,
book title.
yeah, it's like
That's the book title. The teeth of social media.
the teat of social media.
I would
I'll
read
write
that.
it. I'll
It's
get it done if I can
David
concentrate.
Foster Wallace's The Teeth of Social Media. I have to admit, this is the deepest conversation I've had in a long time. And when I heard we were going to be talking about Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, I didn't think we would be going in this deep. This has been a great conversation. Before we end, though, I want to end on a very selfish and consumeristic couple questions, because you're on YouTube, um, and you've got a bigger following on YouTube than I do.
Do I?
And so I'm going to start with some questions. So I'm being like, my camera is shooting me straight ahead. Your camera is sort of shooting you a little bit down. Am I doing YouTube wrong?
No, I think I might be.
You
Because a
look
lot of
good and it looks cool.
Oh, thank you. I don't know. It's more for my own vanity, I guess. That's the reason why. But yeah, I've been I've been doing YouTube for a couple of years now. I wouldn't say I'm as prolific as I once was, because a lot of the problems that we've discussed are also rife on that platform as well. And the thing about YouTube is the incentive structure changes constantly.
Yeah.
And I started off at a time when it was sort of incentivizing video essays and like long form content, which is what I make. But now it incentivizes like high energy, high engagement streaming, a lot of kind of drama, spectacle, political stuff. Like that's kind of the thing that the algorithm is incentivizing currently. So it's been a weird thing. All my eggs aren't in that basket, but it's definitely something that I enjoy doing. I like to used video essays as a way to explore like long form ideas and to do forms of like long form analysis. But I also started my YouTube channel quite a few years ago, so my political opinions have kind of evolved a lot along with it. So it's not like one steady political through line. I think I was a lot more adjacent to the liberal left side when I started, and now I'm a little bit more kind of less orthodox in that sense. So it's kind of a diary of my like little journey, I guess.
And your videos seem to be like very highly produced. There's a lot of images, and you're narrating. And do you do the editing yourself, or do you have someone who helps you with that?
Yeah, I do
awesome.
all. I do. Thank you. My boyfriend does the audio, and because he's an audio engineer. That's like his day job. He works in music and film and stuff. And I also went to film school as well, so it's like a chance for me to flex my creative muscles.
Okay, so you went to film school. That explains why I can't do this.
Yeah. I went to film school.
That helps.
I feel embarrassed saying it because I still don't see them as that high production value, I guess, but because it's still YouTube, so I guess I'm self-conscious in that regard.
Literally, all I can do is hit record. You and I talk, and if I give your podcast the wrong name, we just go with it. You know what I mean? Like that's my editing.
No, it's all good. I really enjoy the process of like editing and putting together visuals and having musical cues and like performance. Like in my heart, I'm like a creative, and I even see like the writing I do as also part of like the creative process. But in my heart, I'm definitely like an art hoe, which is what the kids call it these days. Yeah, I'm an art host, so like I use YouTube as like an outlet for that like side of my thing. But I'm since Newsweek and stuff, I've been getting a lot more into writing, and I'm really enjoying writing columns and writing stuff on my Substack, and I've been getting a lot of response, and it's been really positive so far. So yeah, I'm really enjoying that process.
Well, I wasn't lying. This has been one of the most stimulating conversations that I've had in a long time. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Let's plug some stuff. How can people follow you on Twitter, on YouTube, read you? How can they do all that?
Thank you so much. So on Twitter, I'm pretty sure I'm like pretty shadow banned at this point, but if you can find me, it's @SpeaksAngie. And then my YouTube is Angie Speaks. And then my podcast is called Low Society Podcast, and we're on all major platforms. And we recently had Glenn Greenwald on this week, which was quite a fun conversation and interesting to talk to him.
Yeah, he's a great conversationalist. He's been here.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
Is Speaks your real last name?
No. I wish it was. No. It's because it's what I do. So that's why I use it. It's a way of me reminding myself what my purpose is. It's actually really funny because I came up with it because my mom gave me my baby book from when I was small, like the one where the doctors like record the progress of the baby. And I think I must have been about 3 years old. And the doctor said, very articulate, speaks a lot. So yeah, I guess it's just like always been my thing. So I use it to remind myself of like why I was put here on earth and like
it
what
works.
I was supposed to be. And also to remain anonymous as well because I don't want my business out there. So yeah, that's why.
I don't blame you. It's a good name anyway. So
thank you. Thank you very much.
This has been awesome. Angie Speaks, thank you for coming on the news.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a really great conversation.